Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this Monday night, July 10th In-Depth Ag Forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. I want to start you off with one of my favorite websites here. It's water.weather.gov. I'll put this in the notes below so you can access it as well. But what I've done is I've gone into the River Forecast tab, and I've only selected locations that are near or above flood stage. A lot of attention has been paid this week to the heavy rains that have come into parts of New England, and you can see here that they have several gauges that are either in some stage of flooding, but many of them are here in this moderate to major flood stage. And this is going to continue to be an issue here over the coming days and possibly even longer than that, because any additional precipitation falling in this area is going to hit some very saturated ground. There are a few other places around the country where the river gauges are showing that they're in flood stage, but I think it's going to be important just to monitor this type of data here going forward in the forecast. Now from here, let's take a look at the most recent precipitation map. Let's get an update on this. I should have the 6 p.m. data, and there it is. And so this is looking at the last 72 hours worth of precipitation. So a lot of isolated storm events today coming into parts of the Pacific Northwest and throughout Idaho and Montana. We watched several strong thunderstorm clusters come through here over the weekend, producing large hail and heavy rains that moved through parts of Oklahoma. You notice that most of the lower Mississippi Basin, this is key in this area, the precipitation that's come into here and how it is actually getting into the Mississippi River. But you come up the East Coast, and there are some places here that have had in the last 3 days alone over 10 inches of rain. There was another event that hit this part of the Midwest, hitting parts of really a small section of Iowa, but hitting central Illinois, Indiana, providing more drought relief for this area. But there are still some holes in this map that we have to continue to discuss to see how several of our major producing states are still in deficit with overall rainfall. So from here, let's just look at the last 14 days, because this map really shows us where some of the places with this pattern shift that's occurred continue to miss out. I'm thinking a lot about the upper Midwest, how this extends into the Canadian Prairie. I'm talking about this part of Missouri, getting into sections of Kansas and Arkansas as well. And even though you see some drier conditions here, there have been better rains before this and some cooler weather that's prevented this from being a major issue. But there are better chances for precip coming along the Gulf Coast as well, hitting also sections of Texas. But in the West, the lack of good flow here over the last couple of weeks has kept it very dry, reducing the risk of isolated storms in the Southwest and throughout California. And then a big chunk here of the Pacific Northwest is also showing up quite dry as well. So despite some recent storms here, we still have key growing areas. Like look at the Snake River Valley, look at this part of the Willamette Valley, getting up here toward into the I-5 corridor, going up towards Seattle and into the Columbia Basin. So we just try to identify these areas just to continue to keep tabs around the United States on those areas that have been missed. We do very clearly see these extremely wet regions here across the country, though, including drought relief in Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky. We've seen it here in this section of Nebraska, which has desperately needed precipitation. A lot of it's been severe, but it's been there. And then, of course, the wettest corridor right in through here when you compare this to average. Now, I want to talk about the Mississippi River because we've been watching this carefully after last fall's drought. So we know that in Memphis, the river got up to, I think it was almost 12 feet below low stage, which is here, the zero line. And then it made this recovery all the way through some spring flooding, early spring flooding, like in March. Since then, it's gone through a few episodes of brief drought, but then the major one that hit in May and June, and it got back down here about 5 feet below low stage. Well, some of the recent heavy rains have brought this river back up, and we need to see it continue to recover in order to ensure that we're going to get more barge traffic, flowing down that river as we go into this critical late summer and fall time period for the Mississippi River. So I'm just going to keep you posted on this so we can kind of watch how this particular graphic changes. From there, I want to show you some satellite data from the West, and this was from today. So this is when EOS Terra, that platform on which is MODIS, went over California this morning. And we still have snow in the Sierra Nevada mountains, and I actually saw some video while I was on vacation last week of people still skiing here. But thinking about that and remembering just the tremendous amount of flooding we saw earlier in the year, I do want to show you that the latest Sentinel data, which I have here from July the 5th, continues to show in the Tulare Basin the flooding that is it's been ongoing for months here across this major farmland. And that's what you're seeing here with this very high resolution satellite data. So if you remember, we've been talking about this since early spring. It's still showing up as an issue here. From there, though, it is important to look at the latest reservoir data from California. And once again, we've gotten through a big chunk of spring here and into summer where the reservoirs have not just been healthy but completely full. Now we're going to watch these levels continue to change, and some of the evaporative stress that's coming into the west in the coming days and possibly weeks is going to start to put some more pressure on the water supply in the west. So we could start to see some of these values coming down, but as I showed you, there's still more mountain snowpack here that's continuing to get into the river system and into these reservoirs, especially coming out of the central Sierra Nevada. Now from here, I want to take you north and show you the latest hydromet data, one of my favorite websites here. And what you've got are the teacup diagrams. So on this website, and again, I'll link this one for you as well. You can come into any of these basins in the Pacific Northwest and take a look at the teacup diagrams. So what they are is they're showing you the reservoir capacity and where they currently stand with respect to being full. So I clicked over here in the Snake River Valley, and then you can see this is what the teacup looks like. So for example, at American Falls, it's 70% full. And overall, as you kind of dance around the Pacific Northwest and look at each one of these, the reservoir strength right now is good. We've got water in the reservoirs, which means despite some of the dry conditions we've seen throughout the Pacific Northwest, we continue to see good overall hydrology for the region. But if there's dryland operations, that's where it's been significant in terms of the drought stress in those particular regions. So I'll make sure and link that for you so you got it as well. Now, continuing on this kind of catching up on where we've been, this is the last 30 days looking at solar flux anomaly. So this is looking at how much sunlight's getting down to the surface. And when we looked back in May and June, it was this area that just saw the deepest, warmest color shades, and that represents a lot of sunshine. But there's been more precipitation, more storms rolling through this area. But just take a look at what's going on through parts of Canada right in through here. This would indicate a lot more clear sky than clouds. And if we just think about what this could mean in terms of drought stress, I pulled up the latest data from agriculture.canada.ca, which tells us the last 30 days looking at percent of normal precipitation. And what we know here is, or percentile, is that we have several large pockets here in the Canadian Prairie that are showing up very dry compared to normal in the lowest percentile. And this is going to be an ongoing concern until we can get storms to get back into that area. Now, with anything, a round of storms coming through these regions could really improve crop health without overall undoing the longer standing drought. And we're certainly seeing that in our own U.S. drought monitor. So for example, some of our deepest regions in drought have lately seen heavier precipitation. I'm thinking about this corridor and through here, parts of Michigan. But the drought monitor is not, this drought monitor is not designed to show you that. It's a long-term drought indicator. So it's looking at the overall water health over a longer time period, which is why it still shows the stress here in this part of Nebraska. But I am watching carefully this region in the Pacific Northwest. And we're going to see how the upcoming rains could start to make a dent in some of this area in the next 7 to 10 days, continue to relieve the drought in here, because there's been a few holdouts as we've been discussing in our morning reports, especially in like parts of Missouri, just as one example. I think it is important to note that we do have a few states that are completely out of drought. And for many in Colorado, this has been years in the making, but the entire state of Colorado is currently out of all stages of drought. You can also see we've got a few places over here in the southeast. Most of Georgia and South Carolina are out of drought as well. So is Maine. And what drought was here in Vermont, that is erased by some of the incredibly heavy rains we've seen as of late. So thinking as of late, I want to show you this map. This is just from when the pattern broke, which was on the 28th of June through the 10th of July. So we're looking at precipitation ranks by climate district. And it's been this quarter that's opened up to just a lot of heavy rainfall. Of course, we had the derecho event that went through here, the subsequent very large complexes of storms that rolled through the plains and brought in some extremely heavy rain. But just notice, there's a lot of single digits in here saying that this 13, 15-day time period is some of the wettest such time period on record. And of course, that includes this here as well. But we have questions about when we're going to fill in some of the gaps in other places. And will we see a monsoon really begin to develop at some point this year? And what about the heat that's building into the west, and how's that going to affect the storms that will run over the top of that? All stuff we're going to cover here in just a few moments. So right now, the big thing that I'm worrying about is that there is a cluster or multiple clusters of storms that have come into the central plains of the United States. Several of them have been warned for being severe, but this whole area is under a severe thunderstorm watch. We still have the flood we're monitoring here in the northeast. This is all related to heat in this area, though. Heat advisories, excessive heat watches, and warnings. And this is all kind of playing into the overall structure of a larger ridge that's going to start to open up and meander between the southern plains and the southwest over the coming days and possibly weeks. I'm worried about the pattern becoming a bit stagnant and getting stuck because I'm not identifying any major drivers that can shove it out of the way. But this will be something we're going to continue to monitor very carefully going forward. Today's satellite imagery just here late in the day. There's the sunset over here. We're watching a sizable cluster of storms right here. These are the ones that have been warned and also have the large area of where the severe thunderstorm watch is. And we've just been seeing these storms kind of erupt here on this frontal boundary that's kind of draped right in through here. All right, there's a very weak frontal boundary. And some of the storms that are in Colorado, getting into Nebraska and over into Iowa, these are deep, and there's the risk of hail, straight line wind damage. And even though the wind shear profile is a bit interesting, it's kind of got a northwest to southeast component to it. Some of these storms are capable of rotating and producing tornadoes. But before I go much further than this, we still are identifying what the flow is up to. And you can see the smoke that is in the upper atmosphere here getting pulled into this deep Hudson Bay low that is, sitting here to here up in Canada. But if you notice, do you see how the storms are kind of breaking clockwise over the mountains? I think this is going to be something we're going to see a lot of in the coming days and possibly weeks as this ridge begins to open up and really develop and deepen into this region. But where it meanders, does it move back to Texas or Oklahoma or Arkansas, which is what it did last year, absolutely scorching these areas, or does it keep more of a four corner kind of component to its flow, which means we would shut down the monsoon but get a lot of mountain thunderstorms? That seems to be the more favored track, but we'll keep an eye on both of those possible outcomes as we work through this today. So severe weather. I just wanted to bring up the next 3 days here. We noticed that today there's an enhanced risk, and I apologize the graphics are small, but I want to bounce through them relatively quickly. So here's the boundary today. We've already watched the storms pop in this area, so we're going to keep a close eye on this. But then you're going to notice the orientation of this begins to shift as this frontal boundary, which is going to try to stall itself out, slides out of the Central Plains and Western Corn Belt into the Central Corn Belt. And as it does so, or the reason it's going to do that is because of this. There's our deep Hudson low. Here's the flow coming into the west. A lot of little short waves coming into the Pacific Northwest, but this is the ridge I'm watching. So the flow's coming over the top of it. It's being enhanced by the flow coming around this low in Canada, and the net effect is to send a lot of short waves through this area, and they initiate storms. And even though we don't have a big Bermuda high pumping into this, there's moisture in this area, and so it's using it, and it's kicking off these daily thunderstorm events, and they're going to follow this flow. Now, if you remember back to what we talked about in May and June, we had none of this. The flow came into the west and just stopped right there, and it came in right here. And so there was, instead of a big low here, there was a big high pressure cell here. Do you remember this? And the flow came around it like that. So the convergence was here, and that's where the storms are. None of that's happening now. This is entirely moved around, and the deep low occupies much of Canada at this point. We're going to see what this does to temperatures and what it's going to do to the longer term outlook in terms of precipitation as well. But I want you to stay on top of this severe weather threat. And I know the NAM model, if it's got a poor initialization, it won't pick up on where the storms are going to be, but it's going to give us an idea about what to expect. So this is where it was initialized with this evening, right in through here with the storms. And we're going to watch those in the overnight continue to build along that frontal boundary while a low cuts into parts of British Columbia, delivering more storms late this afternoon and this evening here in this region of the Pacific Northwest. And again, we're still going to be watching more rain coming into New England into this evening. But here's our main frontal boundary. And as we go forward into Tuesday morning, this frontal boundary dips right in through here and stalls out. It doesn't get much farther than that. And it's going to be the thing that storms are going to initiate on as we go through the day on Tuesday. So do you see them popping into this area? You see the flow is delivering them this way through Tuesday into Tuesday night. And then as we get into the day on Wednesday, the concern is, and we've seen multiple model runs of this, that somewhere in this vicinity, I don't know where, we are possibly going to have a line of storms that comes bowing through this area. And we don't like those types of storms this time of year because of their speed and their risk of severe straight line winds. This is just one solution. Okay, we'll see a new update of this tomorrow morning in my next video, but you can just see that it's trying to here at some point on Wednesday drive a line of storms through this section of the country. Now the rain is needed, but the severe winds are not needed. What are we seeing in terms of total precipitation over the next 7 days? The ridge and its placement is going to tell us where the storms are going to cascade into this area. We've seen some models go very aggressive on the rainfall totals from parts of southern Iowa and Nebraska through Missouri, southern Illinois, into Kentucky and Tennessee. But overall, picking up on the exact amounts right now is going to be nearly impossible. I just want you to watch this corridor. A lot of isolated storms in the southeast, a lot of isolated storms up the east, but the models have been pretty consistent with keeping this region drier, so we'll have to watch how the Appalachian Mountains influence this flow going forward. You also notice from the Canadian Prairie into parts of the upper Midwest, there's a drier signal. And no strong push of the southwest monsoon. It's trying to come through Mexico here, but if there's a ridge in place here, it's going to have a difficult time getting over that ridge. So let's go have a look at some of the other models. This is the newest update from the 12Z European model. And you just see, as I just kind of rock this back and forth, you see the kind of overall evolution of Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Storms cascading out of the northwest like this across the country, the deep low spinning up here. As we just play this out, let's go a full week. This is what I've got for you from the latest European model update. Now, we always need to look at this in the context of the GFS, so let's do that. This is the GFS over the next week. And a lot of people were talking about the GFS this afternoon because it tried to absolutely bombard parts of Missouri and Illinois and Kansas with some locations here up to 6 inches of rainfall. This is always a red flag. When every time the model does that, there's always the chance for heavy rain in this pattern. But we just need to be aware that sometimes the models really over promise on this rainfall. And they've done that for Missouri too many times. So let's look at it in terms of the model comparison. So just so you see here, remember these colors are where the GFS is wetter. These are where the European is wetter. Notice this large area through here where the GFS 12Z just went substantially wetter than every other model. So we just look at it and say, okay, we understand that this is a possibility, but the likelihood is very low. So another thing to examine here, this map is not showing the difference between two models. It's just showing the next 10 days from the European model. And it helps me identify those areas that I'm concerned about staying drier. A lot of storm clusters in this region, as you can see here. But overall, we're going to watch this region for drier and heat building throughout the western United States. That's the pattern for the next 10 days. It's also good to examine this in terms of probabilities. So this is our map looking at the 10-day probability of grabbing an inch of total precipitation. And again, where the moisture's been opened up in this area, numerous clusters of thunderstorms coming in on the flow, and we just see better chances of getting that heavy rain. This also helps us temper our expectations for Missouri. Notice there, while there is a 80 to 100% chance of getting an inch of rain, when we look at the ensembles and try to assess where the really heavy rains could be, we now see, a 50% chance of getting 2 inches. Now, there will be big storms that roll through here and locally, I'm talking about hyper-locally, deliver more than that. That's always the case. But I'm trying to assess the real chance of widespread damaging flooding after extensive drought has been in the state of Missouri and parts of Kansas. But overall, this is what we're looking at in terms of heavy precipitation. On the drier side of it, this is the outlook for less than half of an inch. So we continue to identify this corridor here. We continue to look west, but there will be isolated storms right in through this region that aren't being well resolved. There will be isolated storms throughout the mountains as the ridge opens up into that clockwise flow here. There will be shortwaves that come through the Pacific Northwest delivering those isolated storms like we saw today. But overall, there's a drier signal in the west because of the presence of this ridge. So here's what it looks like. Ready? As we play forward, what's getting this all set up today is the heat that is a part of the ridge that's moving toward Greenland. This is allowing for a deeper Hudson trough to form. And what we're going to see is the Pacific sends multiple little shortwaves out of the Gulf of Alaska. So it's coming in like this, and then making a big jump here. And that seems to be the flow through the end of the week. So this is where our strongest winds are going to be located. And as you remember, we have to have the flow in place in order to get these storms to emerge. So if you look out there and I show you what those wind speeds look like, it's this corridor that's got the best chances of getting those storms that run over this ridge, enhanced by this trough, and that flow in through there is what initiates these storms. Okay? Now, from here, let's go back to the height map because I think the story is better told on those maps. As we go past Friday into the weekend and getting out there to Sunday and Monday, notice how the ridge migrated a bit more toward Arizona and opened up. This is a 594 ridge. That's a deep ridge in this area, and it is, of course, higher than normal by some places 50 to 100 meters. But the downstream trough here, if you just find that 588 line, which is right here, this is the corridor through which we expect to have the storms kind of cascading off the northwest flow. As we play this out there into July 20th, this would be out there to the 10-day forecast and then beyond. The model wants to open the ridge back up much more broadly across the whole southern tier of the United States. So you're going to see what this does to temperatures in a few moments, but take a look. There's still flow like this coming into the northwest, and the flow will run over the top of this, meaning that we could watch for multiple clusters of storms to go through this particular area. But it'll be difficult to get them far enough south here into the heat that'll sit inside of this larger ridge. Now, what I get worried about this time of year is ridges like this developing in mid to late July and not moving. And I need evidence that it's going to get kicked out of here by something as we move into late July and into August. I'm going to show you what the latest models are thinking about that in just a few moments here. But I want to let you know that over the next 10 days, what you're seeing here is the probability of having at least 1.5 inches of liquid in the atmosphere. And do you see what I see? There's plenty of moisture getting pulled into this area onto which to make those ridge riding storms. And that's why we come back here and just look at where these best probabilities are of the heavy rainfall. And you notice that it's in this area where the moisture is in play and the upper level flow is coming over the top of that ridge. But from here, what I want to show you is this, the week 2 forecast. Now the model, especially the European looking through here, has got some drier risk in this area, but it's not fully picking up on where those storms are going to cascade over the top of that ridge. It can't. It just, we have to look at the pattern to decipher it because the models won't have that. The CPC, as you see in their forecast, they've got near normal rains, near normal mid to late July rains. But down here where the ridge is forming and here in the west, they're talking about below normal, a lot of isolated storms that are dry. So they produce the lightning, but not necessarily the rain that gets to the surface. But as long as that Hudson Trough sits here and starts to meander to the east, we'll keep this whole area wet and stormy going forward, meaning that we're not going to continue to see any drought risk in this area as we press forward in this forecast. Now, the next thing I want to show you here is going to be a discussion about temperatures. And as we look out there, the newest update talking about the 18th to the 24th, it's going to highlight the whole southern tier of the U.S., but mainly focus on the southwest, where the ridge will sit as the greatest risk of excessive heat. We're expecting evaporation rates in this area to be 3 to 5 inches a week because of the heat that's coming. And we're going to call into question the duration of the heat into California. So you notice how the contours kind of close off before they get to the coast. It's because there's a lot of cold water here, and we're curious as to how that cold water will affect the marine boundary layer, will affect the way that the height pattern sets up to deliver, heat as far west and just occupy most of the Central Valley of California. But here, we're expecting it to be really in place. Now, when it comes to this ridge and its placement, I need to just discuss something with you very carefully here. Because when I look out there and I see the longer term models, where was it? Right here. Just opening a ridge and leaving it in place. Do you see this? This is the flow that we've got forecast 11 days from now on the 22nd of July. Okay? Now look at this. If it's June, whoops, where is that guy? There it is. If it's June and you look at the average flow from 1970 to 2022, the flow, which is shown here in the height lines, this is not temperature, this is a look at the pattern, does something like that in June, and then it typically opens like this in July. So the flow comes around and over and dives like that. And then from July to August, it kind of stays like that, even becomes a little bit more amplified. What I'm showing you here is what we call climatology. This is what normally happens in August. There's some sense of ridging here. And you've just seen the models attempt to show you that that's where they want to put the ridges. And the reason why they're showing all of this ridging going on in this area is because there's nothing really there to kick it out. So I'll show you what I mean by that in a moment, but let's look at the effect of it first. With the deeper trough here over the next 5 days, and the ridge opening there, you get cooler weather coming out of the Canadian Prairie and near normal temperatures through the Midwest. We're warmer, much warmer than normal here. We're warmer across the south and into New England as well. That's the next 5 days. Day 5 through 10, this is when the ridge really opens in the west, and that's when a lot of this excessive heat is expected to come in. This, takes us out there all the way to like the 20th of July. And we expect these storms to cascade over the top of it in this area like we talked about earlier. But from there, I just want to remind you that days 10 through 15, if the models are right and not just following climatology, which means they're not getting a strong signal, but opening this ridge here, we'll see more storm events coming over the top of this and then running in this direction. This could be better storms for the Canadian Prairie, isolated but better. This could bring storms into and continue to push a crop forward throughout much of the Midwest, upper Midwest. But as farther south you go, the less the chance is that you'll be in the best storm environment and more toward the bigger heat that'll sit underneath that ridge. And that's why when we look at here day 5 through 10, which is what's shown in terms of temperatures, and then take you day 10 through 15, we start to see the warmth really opening up in a big way toward the end of July. And this has always been a concern of mine for the end of July, seeing heat returning here. And if the heat returns, it's all going to be about where the isolated storm clusters show up in the areas that I'm kind of drawing these lines. You get rain, everything's fine. If you miss the storms, we start to see stress showing up. It is important to note that once we get out there, day 10 through 15, that the heat, because the ridge moves back here, begins to subside in the Pacific Northwest and also into California. We'll just keep watching those temperature patterns every single morning this week in my updates. From there, I do want to show you why I have no confidence in anything beyond persistence or climatology. I've looked at every teleconnection there is, and I'll just tell you, without much movement overall in the flow of the Northern Hemisphere, I'm talking about just anything that sticks out, like the MJO, just collapsing into null space, not really jumping out anywhere other than Indonesia, and you don't have a catalyst to move things forward. There's no major hurricanes right now. There's no major significant heat waves in certain parts of like Russia or Europe to just shove things around and get things displaced. So I have to look up here and just say, well, what's competing for space over North America? So I made this morning just to kind of summarize what I think is happening. The oceans are kind of our symptom to what the atmosphere is up to because they change more slowly. And here's what we've got. We've got a lot of warm water that's nosing its way into this part of the Gulf of Alaska. And what I don't like about seeing that warm water into there is what it potentially does to disrupt the Pacific jet. And if you start to disrupt the Pacific jet and maybe shove it north or just slow it down, then what we end up getting is ridges that expand here because there's nothing to knock them out. The Pacific Meridional Mode, the PMM, I would suggest is losing some of its influence. We can't keep getting storms into this area if the PMM is controlling everything. Because if the Pacific Meridional Mode had its full influence and El Nino wasn't doing anything, the warm blob here wasn't doing anything, and the Atlantic wasn't, then we would just be talking about, an absolutely monumental ridge that would be parked over like Sioux Falls, South Dakota. But it's not there. And so we're seeing the competition between this, El Nino, the warm Atlantic, and I'm sure you've all heard, I talked about this morning too, we've got bathwater here in the Gulf of Mexico. All of these things are kind of competing to control the pattern. And what is the model doing? It's defaulting to climatology. Remember, that's what the model looks like in July, and this is what history tells us it should look like in July. It's almost the same thing with a ridge here. So from that point, what we have to start to do is, let's get caught up here, is look at where the models are suggesting things get to by late August. And do you notice anything? I don't see much of a change. The models have just, in fact, let's blow this out to a North American view. It's the same thing. There's no signal in this. That's just the model defaulting to climatology. So you look at that and you say, well, show me the precipitation. And what you're going to see is the model's inability to resolve thunderstorms. It's not going to be able to see where those storms will cascade over that ridge very well. So it shows you drier risks in here because of resolution, because of the inability to show convection. And it is true. There will be places that run through the central part of the country here into the Canadian Prairie that will be drier than normal because these thunderstorms are highly selective on who they're going to hit and who they're going to miss. And that's the nature of a true summer pattern in which we are currently residing. And what is it going to do? Well, if it opens up a ridge there, it's going to make the temperatures hot. And yes, there is the risk once we get past the next 10 days of seeing more sustained above average temperatures. But let me give you a kind of a what if scenario. If we continue to see ridges that move into to Greenland, there's no chance that this is going to go over and stay hot. We'll end up developing another trough here, and that will just continue to produce cooler weather compared to normal to run into this part of the country. And there are some longer range forecasts that suggest that. Like, let me show you the CPC data. This was now released last week, but their end of the month outlook, I mean, they don't have the heat here in late July and August. They've got storms kind of running around this. And that, this is what they released on Friday, but this would be more persistence what we're in now rather than the persistence of climatology with where that ridge is going to form. Does that make sense? Because I just think that the models are a bit clueless on where this is all going to end up going forward. But that's it. It's summer. It's the most difficult time period for us to forecast because of the lack of good flow, just normally, and the subtlety of thunderstorm development. So from here, let's at least tell you what I do know. If it's July and August and we say El Nino is going to take over, this is what you get. This is a correlation map with July and August precipitation. Blues are drier, reds are wetter. We tend to run the risk of being drier here. We tend to have a weaker southwest monsoon, but we tend to be wetter in these corridors. So that would be if the El Nino dominated the pattern. What about if we instead looked at what would happen if the Pacific meridional mode took over, which is here? If we end up getting that scenario, which I don't see happening right now, the Pacific meridional mode says bring in a ton of storms into the west. No ridges here. Ridge out the central United States and make it really hot and really dry. I don't think either of those two scenarios is accurate. I think there's too much competition for the flow over the United States, and the models have just defaulted to climatology with that ridge that sits somewhere in here. So will there be ridge riders northwest flow? Probably. That's what I think is going to happen out of this, not either of these two scenarios. All right, what about longer range? Because we did get new data last week. Right now, I wouldn't trust these very far. They kind of really betrayed us back in spring, and I don't think they've got a good handle on the pattern. I think the only thing I can agree with the longer range models about is the lack of good southwest monsoonal flow. But this is August, September, October, looking at precipitation anomalies for the United States and Canadian prairie here. And again, why it has this wetter corridor into this area? Could this just be from storms rolling out of this direction? I think that's the orientation, not flow coming in like this. Remember, this model cannot resolve hurricanes at this time scale. So what do we see here? Well, first of all, does it line up with what the multi-model ensemble forecast shows? Because this just came out at the end of last week. And kind of it does. You see, it's got a wetter corridor there and there, drier in the west, drier in the upper Midwest. We can at least say that the models kind of have a similar look to them. But overall, I can't put a lot of stock in saying that this is exactly what the August, September, October pattern is going to look like. We do know, if I show you this a little bit farther out into the Atlantic, that the peak of hurricane season, with the displaced Bermuda high, are we really opening up this corridor to more activity where storm systems make the turn? But there's bathwater in here in the Gulf. Anything that shows up in the Gulf is going to just explode. It's going to go very quickly and start to run north. And is El Nino actually going to increase wind shear in this area? Because it really hasn't up until this point. These are all kind of questions that still need to be answered with what this upcoming season is going to look like. So I will apologize for not having strong guidance or any confidence in it, but there just isn't. There just isn't at this time. And I think if anybody comes in and confidently tells you what they're going to think is going to happen here, I think I don't know where they're getting their confidence from. I'll just leave it at that. I do know this. El Nino continues to develop, and you can see when we look back here at these ocean temperatures that they're warming up, and they're expected to be 2 degrees C above average through September into October and November. And if we think about what that could mean, if El Nino takes over, we tend to have a drier start to the wet season in the Northwest. That's what the blues mean, but an active subtropical jet and some late season tropical activity here. It tends to give us wetter conditions across a broad section of the country, going forward into that time frame. Okay, so I want to switch gears to finish this up and just give you an international perspective on a few things. This is our latest map showing you the Vegetation Health Index change from a year ago, and this goes through July the 8th. And if we open up this map, there it is, we start to see a couple of things here. I'll be watching very carefully for how these numbers improve over the next couple of weeks because of the rain that's come in here. But I do note this part of the Canadian Prairie compared to this part of the Western Plains of the United States. Such an improvement here, such a degradation there. Okay. From there, you come down to South America. I expect improvement in this to happen over the next couple of weeks because there's rain coming in here. And that's going to really help with just the overall hydrology of this area. Europe, better looking than last year for most locations. Watch this very carefully into Africa, though, because we're starting to see more storms showing up here. And the greener this becomes, the better the storms are. And that's going to be just an important thing to watch. This was a major concern, the fact that things did not look as good in parts of the Manchurian Plain, which is here, or the North China Plain. But we're starting to see shifts in the precipitation pattern here, bringing in better rains. And I did get to speak with several of my Australian colleagues today. In parts of Queensland here, there's just a lot of canola. There's a lot of winter crops that are grown in this area. Some places have missed out on major rainfall, but other places have been absolutely just buried in water. It's been a very difficult forecast in parts of Australia. So thinking about that and looking forward, let's talk temperatures first. Next 10 days, okay, we've got the pattern we've discussed in North America. There's cooler weather coming into Argentina, but quite warm in much of Brazil. There is heat in Central and Southern Europe, but you notice how this doesn't extend way up here into Scandinavia. If it did, we'd have something bigger to talk about. But there's a bit of a heat wave coming into Central and Southern Europe. No major stresses in terms of temperatures in China. Much of Australia is going over warmer. From there, this is what the precip regime looks like. With the MJO stuck in this area, a lot of heavy rainfall into India. We do see less risk of major dry areas in the North China Plain and the Manchurian Plain. But just keep an eye on this with me going forward. Here's the storms I'm watching coming off of Africa. This will be the key to be keeping an eye on where this tropical season begins to kind of start to develop. But better rains down here in southern Brazil and Argentina. These are correcting some long-standing drought issues here. And throughout Europe, isolated storms pop in the mountains, but with the heat that's coming in, we are a bit drier than we were as of late. The storm track is farther to the north, hitting the British Isles and then getting up here into Scandinavia. So that's what I've got for you in terms of international updates. And had a longer video tonight, but just a lot of things to catch up on. So I'll talk to you again in the morning. Appreciate it. Thank you.